The email arrived at 8:17 a.m., 3 minutes before Elena Wright finished her second cup of burnt hospital coffee. Mandatory HR meeting, conference room B, immediate attendance required. There was no greeting, no explanation, just the sterile urgency that had become the language of the institution she had served for over a decade. Elena glanced at the wall clock above the nurse's station. The second hand ticked too loudly. Around her, the floor hummed with routine. Monitors beeping, gurneys rolling, the soft chaos of a system pretending to care. She straightened her navy blue scrubs, smoothed a wrinkle she knew no one would notice, and walked down the corridor as if muscle memory could protect her. Conference room B smelled faintly of lemon disinfectant and fear. 3 people sat at the table. Karen Mitchell from HR, a hospital attorney Elena had never met, and Dr. Nathan Cole, chief medical officer. Nathan didn't look at her when she entered. That hurt more than the rest. "Please have a seat, Elena," Karen said, hands folded with professional sympathy. "This won't take long." It never did. They spoke in rehearsed phrases: internal communication breach, failure to follow escalation protocols, loss of institutional confidence, words designed to erase responsibility while assigning blame. Elena listened, nodding politely, her mind drifting back to the night shift 3 weeks earlier. The patient with no family listed, the unusual lab results, the quiet panic in his eyes when the machine started screaming. "I followed procedure," Elena said finally, her voice steady. "I documented everything." The attorney adjusted his glasses. "This decision is final." Nathan cleared his throat, but still didn't meet her gaze. Elena wondered how many nights she'd covered for him when his surgeries ran late, how many times she'd defended his temper to junior staff. 12 years reduced to a man who couldn't look at her. Karen slid a folder across the table. Severance terms, a non-disclosure agreement, health insurance extension, 3 months. "You may collect your personal belongings under supervision," Karen said gently. Elena stood. Her legs felt distant, like borrowed limbs. She signed nothing. "I need my jacket," she said. The locker room was quiet, the way spaces become when they've already decided you no longer belong. Elena removed her name badge and placed it carefully on the bench. Elena Wright, RN. The letters looked temporary now. Outside, the California sun was cruelly bright. She didn't call a rideshare. Walking felt appropriate, penance maybe, or proof she still existed without the hospital walls holding her upright. Her phone buzzed once, a text from Nathan she didn't open. As she moved through downtown streets, Elena became acutely aware of her invisibility. People passed her with coffees and headphones, absorbed in curated lives. No one knew she just lost everything that defined her. No one cared. Her thoughts returned, uninvited, to the patient. John Doe, according to the chart. No social media footprint, no visitors. A man who'd whispered thank you like it was a confession when she stayed past her shift to monitor his vitals. She reached the quieter blocks near the old warehouses when the sound hit her. Deep, mechanical, wrong. The air vibrated. Elena looked up just as the first helicopter descended, rotors slicing the sky. Wind tore through the street, sending dust and paper into spirals. A second followed, landing with military precision. People screamed. Someone dropped to the ground. Men in tactical gear poured out, weapons raised but disciplined. One of them shouted, his voice amplified and sharp. "Where's the nurse?" Elena's heart slammed against her ribs. She took a step back, then another. Every instinct told her to disappear, but the words echoed again, closer now, searching. "We're looking for the nurse who walked out of Coastline Medical." A hand grabbed her wrist. "Elena Wright?" a voice demanded. In that moment, the truth settled heavy and undeniable. She had never really been fired. She had been removed, and whatever she'd touched that night in the ICU was powerful enough to make the sky come looking for her. The men did not touch her again after that first grip. One of them raised a hand, signaling the others to stand down, and the street slowly exhaled. The helicopters kept their engines running, a low, menacing thrum that vibrated through Elena's bones, but no one forced her forward. No handcuffs, no shouted commands. That restraint was somehow worse. It suggested intention, precision, certainty. "We're not here to arrest you, Ms. Wright," a woman said, stepping into view. She wore a dark blazer over tactical gear, her hair pulled back with the severity of someone who couldn't afford softness. "But we need to talk. Somewhere quieter." Elena looked past her, down the street she'd been walking only minutes earlier. The path home felt impossibly distant now, like a life she'd imagined rather than lived. People watched from doorways and car windows, phones raised, recording. By tomorrow there would be clips online. Helicopters land for unknown nurse. Speculation would fill the gaps faster than truth ever could. "I was just fired," Lena said, the words coming out flat. "I don't have anything." The woman studied her, then nodded once. "That's not entirely true." They did not take her with them. Instead, after a brief exchange over an earpiece, the woman stepped aside. "Walk," she said quietly. "We'll follow at a distance. You need a few minutes. So do we." It made no sense, but nothing did anymore. So Elena walked. The late afternoon light stretched long shadows across the pavement, turning familiar buildings into distorted versions of themselves. She moved without direction at first, letting her body decide. Each step felt like it belonged to someone else. A nurse on autopilot, trained to keep moving even when the ground gave way. Her mind, however, refused to stay present. It kept pulling her backward to the last patient. To the night everything subtly broke. He'd been admitted under an alias. That much had been clear. Hospitals saw false names all the time. Undocumented workers, victims of domestic abuse, people hiding from deaths or families. Elena had learned not to ask questions that weren't hers to ask. But this was different. The chart was too clean. No digital trail, no emergency contact, no insurance fights. Someone had smoothed the path before he ever arrived. He was conscious when she took his vitals, eyes too alert for someone who'd nearly coded in the ambulance. When the monitor spiked, it wasn't panic she saw. It was calculation. "Don't let them intubate me," he'd whispered, fingers clutching her sleeve with surprising strength. "Please." Elena should have called the attending immediately, should have escalated, followed protocol. Instead, she'd hesitated, just long enough to adjust the oxygen, to stabilize him without triggering alarms. A decision measured in seconds. A decision that felt, even now, unfinished. "You saved me," he'd said later, voice rough but steady. They didn't want that. At the time, she dismissed it as delirium. Now, as she crossed an intersection and narrowly avoided a speeding car, his words replayed with new weight. The city offered no comfort. Construction noise screamed from one block, while another sat eerily quiet. Storefronts shuttered with for lease signs fading in the sun. Elena caught her reflection in a darkened window, rumpled scrubs, hair escaping its tie, eyes hollowed by shock. She looked like someone who'd been erased halfway through existing. Her phone buzzed again. This time she looked. "Nathan, please call me. It's not what you think." She laughed, a short, brittle sound that startled a passerby. It was always exactly what you thought, just dressed up in better language. Nathan had been there that night. He'd signed off on the chart without reading it, trusting the system to protect him the way it always had. And when pressure came, from lawyers, from administrators, from forces Elena was only beginning to glimpse, he'd chosen survival, not her. She kept walking. The woman from earlier followed at a distance, far enough not to draw attention, close enough to remind Elena she wasn't alone, or free. That ambiguity pressed against her chest, tightening with each step. She passed a bus stop where a teenage girl scrolled through her phone, earbuds in, oblivious. Elena wondered what it must be like to move through the world without carrying other people's lives inside you, without knowing how easily care could become liability, compassion a threat. A memory surfaced unbidden, her first year as a nurse, her hands shaking as she learned to insert IV lines, her supervisor telling her, "You can't save everyone, but you can always choose how you treat them." Elena had believed that was enough. Now she wasn't so sure. The sidewalk narrowed, forcing her closer to the street. She became acutely aware of the sound of footsteps behind her, the way the city seemed to lean in, curious but uncaring. Internal exile. That was the phrase that formed in her mind. She was still here, still breathing, but unmoored from the structures that had given her meaning. She stopped near a small park, one she'd passed 100 times without noticing. A man slept on a bench, Possessions gathered in a cart beside him. For a moment, Elena saw herself there. Discarded, overlooked, a cautionary figure people stepped around. "What happens if I keep walking?" she asked aloud. The woman behind her answered without hesitation. "Then eventually, people who don't land helicopters will find you. And they won't ask." Elena closed her eyes. The truth was, she already knew there was no walking away. The feeling she'd had since leaving the hospital, that something was unfinished, had been right. Whatever she'd done in that ICU room had set something in motion, and like all unfinished things, it demanded acknowledgement. She turned around. "Okay," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it didn't shake. "Let's talk." As they moved back toward the waiting vehicles, Elena felt the last fragile thread of her old life snap. Not violently, but cleanly. The city watched, indifferent as ever, as she crossed an invisible line. She was no longer just a nurse who'd been fired. She was a witness. From the air, the city looked orderly. Grids and glass, traffic flowing like blood through arteries designed decades ago. From the ground, as the first helicopter cut through the sky, order fractured into noise and instinct. Elena heard it before she saw it, a low percussion that pressed into the chest, the kind that made windows tremble and conversations die mid-sentence. People looked up in confusion, shielding their eyes from the sun as the shadow passed over them, wide and deliberate. The sound did not fade, it multiplied. A second helicopter followed, tighter, lower. They descended with practiced indifference, rotors carving the afternoon into violent wind. Trash skittered. A construction tarp tore loose and wrapped itself around a light pole. Someone screamed. Someone else started filming. Ordinary life scattered, revealing its fragility like exposed wiring. Elena stood frozen at the curb, one hand still clutching the strap of her bag. Her body recognized danger faster than her mind could assign meaning. She tasted metal. Her pulse thudded in her ears. "This isn't for you," she thought. The way people do when catastrophe brushes past their lives. This is for something bigger, someone else. The helicopters landed. Men poured out in coordinated motion, helmets, rifles, boots hitting pavement in a rhythm that belonged to another world. Not police, not private security. The insignia on their sleeves was unfamiliar, deliberately nondescript. Power without branding. A man with a bullhorn stepped forward. He did not shout immediately. He waited, letting the silence settle, letting fear do the work first. "Listen carefully," he said, voice amplified, calm and absolute. "We are looking for a nurse." The words struck Elena like a hand to the sternum. Around her, people turned, confused, murmuring, "A nurse? Here?" Someone laughed nervously. Someone else whispered, "What the hell?" The man continued, "Elena Wright, registered nurse. You walked out of Coastline Medical less than an hour ago." Elena's name echoed off concrete and glass, stripped of intimacy, transformed into a location marker. Visibility arrived like a sentence. She felt it, the subtle shift in the crowd, curiosity sharpening into focus, heads turning, eyes measuring, phones angling toward her without anyone quite knowing why. Her face burned, not with shame, but with exposure, like she'd been undressed in public without warning. "Run," her body urged, but there was nowhere to go that wasn't already anticipated. A voice cut through the noise, closer now. "Elena Wright." She turned. A woman stood a few feet away, mid-40s, composed in a way that suggested long familiarity with chaos. Tactical vest under a dark blazer, hair pulled back, eyes sharp but not unkind. She did not reach for Elena. She simply waited, a professional courtesy extended to someone who no longer had choices. "Yes," Elena said. The word felt too small. The woman nodded and raised a hand. The men around them shifted, weapons lowering a fraction, not enough to be reassuring, just enough to signal control. "For everyone's safety," the woman said, projecting her voice now, "this conversation will be brief." She turned back to Elena, quieter. "You're not in trouble, but you are involved." "In what?" Elena asked. The woman's mouth tightened. "That depends on what you remember." Behind them, the helicopters idled, engines hot, ready. Elena became aware of how loud they were, How impossible it was to think around that sound. Maybe that was the point. Overwhelm first, explanation later. The woman gestured toward a nearby storefront, its windows rattling. Let's step aside. They moved together, a small orbit of authority enclosing Elena without touching her. From the corner of her eye, she saw a man in scrubs being pushed gently back, his protest swallowed by the noise. The world had narrowed to her, whether she wanted it or not. Inside the shadow of the building, the sound softened enough for words to land. 3 weeks ago, the woman said, you were assigned to a male patient admitted under an alias. ICU late shift. Elena's throat went dry. She nodded. You made a call, the woman continued, not by the book. I stabilized him, Elena said, heat rising. He was crashing. I did what I was trained to do. And by doing so, the woman said evenly, you prevented a sequence of events that would have ended very differently. For him, Elena asked. For several people, the woman replied, including you. A shout erupted from the street. We got movement! The woman's jaw tightened. She pressed a finger to her earpiece, listening, then exhaled slowly. When she looked back at Elena, something like urgency flickered beneath the control. You were fired today, she said. That wasn't coincidence. It was containment. Elena felt the words settle into her bones. Containment. Of information, of liability, of inconvenient conscience. They wanted me gone, Elena said. They wanted you quiet, the woman corrected. Those are not the same thing. Elena thought of Nathan's text, unread, of the chart signed too quickly, of administrators who smiled as they erased her. Anger flared, sharp and disorienting. So what am I now? Elena asked. A problem? The woman studied her for a long moment. A variable, she said, and variables make powerful people nervous. Outside, the bullhorn crackled again. This is your final notice. The woman leaned closer, lowering her voice. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to walk, slowly, away from the crowd. We will not touch you unless we have to. That choice is yours. And if I don't, Elena asked, then someone else will decide for you, the woman said, not unkindly. Elena looked back toward the street, the people, the phones, the spectacle of it all. Her ordinary life had already been shattered. Refusal wouldn't fix that. Silence wouldn't undo what she'd seen, what she'd done. She took a breath. Okay, she said. They stepped back into the open. The moment Elena moved, the world rearranged itself around her. Cameras tracked. Whispers surged. Somewhere online, her name would already be attaching itself to theories, lies, headlines, yet unwritten. The helicopters did not follow as she walked away, but their presence pressed into her back, a reminder that the sky itself had taken notice. For the first time since leaving the hospital, Elena understood the true cost of visibility. Once seen, you could never return to being ordinary. They took her to a building that did not exist on any map she recognized. From the outside, it looked like a logistics office. Low concrete, tinted windows, a flag Elena didn't immediately identify. No signage, no sense of arrival. Just a gate that opened without comment and closed with a finality that made her chest tighten. Inside, the air was cool and quiet, the kind of quiet engineered to absorb panic. Elena was led through hallways that smelled faintly of ozone and coffee, past doors marked only with numbers. No names, no departments. It reminded her uncomfortably of the ICU at night, controlled, vigilant, always one step away from crisis. The woman from the street finally introduced herself as Director Claire Harlan. Not her title, just the one she chose to offer. They sat across from each other in a small conference room. No mirrors that Elena could see, but she assumed they were there. A bottle of water appeared beside her hand without explanation. Before we say anything else, Claire said, folding her hands, I need you to understand this conversation is classified. What you hear here will not be acknowledged outside this room. Elena nodded. She felt oddly calm, the way she did before delivering bad news to a family. Shock had burned itself out, leaving clarity behind. You were fired today, Claire continued, because Coastline Medical received pressure from multiple federal intermediaries. Elena let out a slow breath. So it was ordered. Suggested, Claire corrected. Strongly. Because of him, Elena said. Not a question. Claire slid a tablet across the table. On the screen was a photograph Elena had never seen. A man in his late 40s, hair darker, face fuller, standing beside a woman and a teenage boy. Smiling. Ordinary. "This is Michael Reyes," Claire said. "Or rather, who he used to be." Elena stared at the image, then closed her eyes. She saw the ICU bed, the oxygen mask, the fear carefully hidden behind control. "He's a protected witness," Claire continued. "Former executive in a biotech firm currently under federal investigation for data manipulation, illegal human trials, and, most relevant to you, collaboration with private healthcare systems to suppress adverse outcomes." Elena's fingers curled into her palm. "The hospital," she said. "Yes," Claire replied, "including Coastline Medical." The room felt smaller. "He was supposed to die," Elena said quietly. Claire did not disagree. His condition upon arrival should have triggered an automatic escalation. Intubation, sedation, a cascade of interventions that, given his compromised state, would have ended his usefulness. "Usefulness," Elena repeated, bitter. "You didn't follow the cascade," Claire said. "You stabilized him manually, bought time we needed." Elena swallowed. She remembered the hesitation, the way her instincts had overridden protocol. A decision she'd replayed 100 times, wondering if it had cost her everything. "You didn't know who he was," Claire said. "That's what makes your role unintentional and invaluable." The word landed strangely. Valuable. After a day of being erased. "So they fired me to protect themselves," Elena said. "To protect the narrative," Claire corrected. "If questions came up later, they needed distance. You were the loose end." Elena laughed softly, then stopped when she realized her hands were shaking. 12 years, she said, and they didn't even try to warn me." Claire's expression softened, just a fraction. "Institutions don't warn," she said. "They remove risk." A folder appeared on the table, thicker than the one HR had offered her. Inside were documents, emails, memos, signatures. Nathan's name appeared more than once. Elena looked away. "I don't want to see it." "You should," Claire said gently. "Trust is hardest to dismantle when it's incomplete." Elena forced herself to read. The timeline was clinical, devastating. Internal discussions, legal counsel advising personnel separation. A final note: Nurse Wright displays independent judgment inconsistent with compliance standards. Compliance. The word tasted rotten. "So what now?" Elena asked. "You needed me alive long enough to keep him alive. That's done." "Not entirely," Claire said. "He's still testifying, and people are still invested in silencing any variables connected to him." Elena looked up. "Including me?" "Yes." Silence stretched between them. "You could disappear," Claire said eventually. "We can arrange protection, a new identity, distance." Elena imagined it. A quiet town, a different name, a life reduced to safety. No hospital, no past. "And if I don't?" she asked. "Then you become visible," Claire said. "Publicly, eventually, as a whistleblower, as someone who stood in the wrong place and didn't move." Elena thought of the crowd, the phones, the helicopters. "I never wanted this," she said. Claire nodded. "Most people who matter never do." Elena leaned back, exhaustion washing over her. "Nathan knew," she said suddenly. "Didn't he?" "Yes," Claire replied. "Not everything. Enough." Something inside Elena cracked, not loudly, not cleanly. Just a quiet fracture where certainty used to be. She had loved him once, trusted him with small pieces of herself she rarely shared. He had chosen the system. Again. "They didn't just fire me," Elena said. "They made sure I couldn't go back." Claire did not argue. Elena closed her eyes. In the darkness, she saw herself in the ICU, hands steady, choosing care over caution. She had believed that was enough. "What happens to nurses like me?" she asked. "The ones who don't fit?" Claire considered her. "Some get broken," she said. "Some get quiet. And some," she paused, "learn what they're worth." Elena opened her eyes. For the first time since that HR meeting, she felt something other than loss. Anger, yes. Grief. But beneath it, a steady pulse of resolve. "I won't disappear," Elena said, "and I won't stay quiet." Claire watched her for a long moment, then nodded once. "Then you should know," she said. "This will cost you more than your job." Elena stood. Her legs were tired, but they held. "They already took my trust," she said. "They don't get the rest." Outside the room, the building hummed on, indifferent. Somewhere else, Michael Reyes was still breathing because she had chosen to act. Hidden value, Elena realized, wasn't about what others assigned to you. It was what survived when everything else was stripped away. They let her go back once, just once, not as an employee, not as a witness escorted through back corridors, as herself, walking through the front doors of Coastline Medical with a temporary badge clipped to her jacket, stamped visitor in red. Elena hadn't expected how much it would hurt. The lobby looked the same. Polished floors, the abstract sculpture no one ever understood. The faint smell of antiseptic disguised as cleanliness. A digital screen cycled through donor names, philanthropy masking profit. People passed her without recognition, or worse, with it. A few nurses glanced up, then quickly away. Contagion, Elena realized, wasn't just biological. It was reputational. Nathan had agreed to meet her in his office. His message had been brief, careful. "I owe you an explanation." As if explanations were currency he still possessed. The elevator ride felt longer than it used to. Each floor chimed like a reminder of time served. When the doors opened, Elena hesitated before stepping out. She pressed her thumb against the cool metal, grounding herself. Nathan's office door was ajar. He stood when he saw her, a reflex he hadn't lost yet. He looked thinner, tired in a way sleep didn't fix. For a moment, just a moment, Elena saw the man she'd fallen for during endless night shifts, the one who'd brought her coffee and listened when she talked about her mother's illness, the one who'd touched her like he was afraid she might disappear. "Elena," he said softly. "Don't," she replied, closing the door behind her. "Don't say my name like it still belongs to you." He flinched. They stood there surrounded by books and awards and framed photos of conferences they'd once attended together. Proof of legitimacy. Proof of belonging. "I didn't want it to happen like this," Nathan said. "You didn't want it to happen at all," Elena corrected. "But you let it." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she knew too well. "You don't understand the pressure we were under." "I understand pressure," Elena said. "I work 12-hour shifts with lives in my hands. I understand pressure when it bleeds." Silence filled the room, thick and accusatory. "They told us he was a liability," Nathan said finally. "That if anything went wrong, the hospital would be exposed. Funding, licenses, careers." "And you believed them," Elena said. "I believed I could fix it," he replied. "I thought if we controlled the fallout." "You thought if you sacrificed me," Elena cut in, her voice sharp, "you'd still be clean." Nathan's eyes flickered. Not denial, recognition. "I didn't think they'd fire you," he said weakly. Elena laughed, a low sound edged with disbelief. "You signed the recommendation." He closed his eyes. "That chart," Elena said, stepping closer now. "You didn't read it. You trusted the system because it's always protected you." "That's not fair," he said. "No," Elena agreed. "It's accurate." She felt it then, the old pull, the intimacy of knowing exactly how to hurt each other. Desire didn't vanish just because trust did. It lingered, distorted, braided with resentment. "Did you ever love me?" she asked. Nathan looked at her like the question physically hurt. "Yes, but not enough," Elena said. He didn't argue. A knock interrupted them. Dr. Lillian Brooks, head of nursing administration, stepped in without waiting for permission. Her expression was composed, managerial, the face of someone who survived by never being surprised. "Elena," Lillian said, "I wondered when you'd come back." "Did you?" Elena replied. "Or did you hope I wouldn't?" Lillian smiled thinly. "You always did have a dramatic sense of timing." They sat, three people bound by a decision none of them would fully own. "You recommended termination," Elena said to Lillian. Yes, Lillian replied calmly, because you didn't follow protocol. I followed care, Elena shot back. In this hospital, Lillian said, those are not the same thing. Elena turned to Nathan. You told me she'd have my back. Lillian raised an eyebrow. He told you many things. The air shifted. Elena saw it then. The layered betrayals not born of malice but of fear dressed as professionalism. You were afraid, Elena said to Lillian. Afraid if I spoke it would lead back to you. To all of you. We're all afraid, Lillian replied. Some of us just choose survival. At what cost? Elena asked. Lillian stood. That's not a question institutions answer. Elena rose too. Then maybe it's time someone else did. She looked at Nathan one last time. The man she'd loved. The man who'd chosen safety over integrity. You don't get to miss me, she said quietly. You chose a world where I don't exist. He reached for her, then stopped himself. Elena walked out. In the hallway, whispers followed her. Not accusations, curiosity, fear. She realized then that the truth was already leaking, seeping through cracks no one could seal. Her presence alone was enough to unsettle them. Outside, the sun was lower now, casting long shadows across the parking lot. Elena inhaled deeply, the air tasting different, cleaner, or maybe she was. Betrayal, she understood, wasn't always loud. Sometimes it wore familiar faces and spoke in reasonable tones. Sometimes it shared your bed and promised you forever. As she walked away from Coastline Medical for the second time, Elena felt the final thread sever, not just from the hospital, but from the version of herself that believed loyalty would be returned in kind. What remained was harder, sharper, and unafraid to be seen. The safe apartment overlooked the river, but the windows didn't open. That was the first thing Elena noticed when Claire Harlan brought her there. After the long drive, after the silent checkpoints, after the city thinned into something quieter and more watchful. The view was expansive, deceptively peaceful. Water sliding past concrete banks, joggers tracing the same loops over and over. Life continuing at a safe, sanctioned distance. Protection, Claire had called it. Elena set her bag down and tested the latch again, as if the glass might suddenly yield. It didn't. You'll be comfortable here, Claire said, removing her jacket. Temporary until things stabilize. Stabilize for who? Elena asked. Claire didn't answer right away. She moved through the apartment with practiced ease, checking corners, adjusting a lamp. Control is habit. For everyone, she said finally, including you. They sat at the small dining table. Claire placed a thin folder between them, not thick like the evidence packet. This one was precise, surgical. Here's the offer, Claire said. You remain under our protection. You do not speak publicly. You do not contact the media, your former colleagues, or anyone connected to Coastline Medical. In return, your involvement remains classified. You get a new placement. Quiet, safe. A new job, Elena asked. A new life, Claire corrected. One where this doesn't follow you. Elena stared at the folder, but didn't open it. She already knew what it would contain. Terms written in careful language. Silence framed as mercy. And Michael Reyes, she asked. He testifies. We take it from there. And the hospital, Claire hesitated. There will be consequences. Not for everyone, Elena said. Claire met her gaze. No. The room felt heavier then, the air pressing down. Elena leaned back, exhaustion settling into her bones. This was the moment, she realized. Not the helicopters, not the confrontation with Nathan. This quiet negotiation was the real crossroads. Why me? Elena asked. You have him. You have documents. Why does my silence matter so much? Because you're credible, Claire said, and human. Juries listen to people like you. So do journalists. You complicate things. Elena smiled without humor. I complicate things by existing. Yes, Claire said simply. After Claire left, the apartment fell into a hush that felt unnatural. Elena wandered from room to room, touching surfaces as if to confirm they were real. Everything was tasteful, impersonal, no photographs, no clutter. A place designed to hold someone temporarily, without imprint. She found the journal in her bag that night. She hadn't written in it consistently for years, not since nursing school, when feelings spilled over faster than she could process them. But during the last weeks at Coastline, she'd started again. Late nights, shaky handwriting, words she hadn't known where else to put. She sat on the edge of the bed and opened to the most recent entry. He asked me not to let them intubate him. I don't know why I listened. I just knew if I followed the steps, he would disappear. And I would too, eventually. I'm tired of pretending I don't see what's happening. Elena closed her eyes. Memory rose unbidden. Her mother, years earlier, in a different hospital, her pain minimized because she was anxious, dramatic, difficult. Elena had learned early how often systems dismissed people quietly, how silence could be enforced with politeness. Another page. They tell us not to get attached, but detachment is a luxury. Someone always pays for it. Elena pressed the journal to her chest. Guilt crept in. Not sharp, but insidious. If she spoke, people would be hurt, careers destroyed. Lawsuits would ripple outward, destabilizing lives far beyond her own. Nurses she'd trained with, patients who relied on the hospital. Silence, Claire had implied, was the compassionate choice. But compassion for whom? Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. An unknown number. She let it ring once, twice. Then she answered. Elena, Claire's voice said, I wanted to give you time, but I need to know where you're leaning. Elena stood and walked to the window, resting her forehead against the cool glass. Below, a couple argued softly on the riverwalk, their words lost but their gestures familiar. Ordinary conflict, visible, aloud. What happens if I say no? Elena asked. Then we proceed differently, Claire replied. You become public, vulnerable. There will be backlash. Against me, Elena said. Yes. And against them? Elena pressed. Claire paused. Eventually. Elena thought of Nathan's office, of Lillian's calm certainty, of how easily the system had closed ranks. I keep thinking, Elena said slowly, that silence would make me safe. And? Claire asked. It would just make me smaller, Elena said. Silence hummed on the line. Elena, Claire said softer now, you don't owe anyone martyrdom. I know, Elena replied, but I owe myself honesty. She hung up before doubt could reclaim her. That night, Elena didn't sleep. She wrote instead, pages and pages. Not evidence, not strategy, just truth, fear, anger. The parts of herself she'd compressed to survive in corridors that rewarded obedience over care. By dawn, the decision had settled, not with certainty, but with alignment. She didn't feel brave. She felt clear. When Claire returned in the morning, Elena handed her the folder, unopened. I won't take the deal, Elena said. Claire studied her for a long moment. No surprise, just assessment. Then you understand what comes next, she said. Yes, Elena replied. Claire nodded once. I'll do what way? They moved quickly once she said yes. There was no ceremony, no dramatic declaration, just a quiet acceleration, like a system finally acknowledging resistance. Elena was relocated again, this time to a federal building downtown, the kind that blended into the skyline by design. Neutral stone, narrow windows, a place meant to endure scrutiny without ever revealing much. The interview room was smaller than she expected. No flags, no one-way mirror she could see. Just a table, 2 chairs, a recorder, and a stack of files that looked heavy enough to alter a life. The lead investigator introduced himself as Thomas Reed. Late 50s, careful voice, the kind of man who'd learned long ago that truth arrived more readily when you didn't chase it. We know this isn't easy, he said, pressing the recorder on. You can stop at any time. Elena nodded. Her hands were folded in her lap, fingers laced tightly enough to ache. She focused on that ache. It anchored her. They started with the basics, employment history, shift schedules, names, dates, facts she could recite without emotion. She'd trained herself for this kind of precision. Then they reached the night in the ICU. Tell us what happened, Reed said. Elena inhaled slowly. He came in unstable, cardiac and respiratory distress. The chart was sparse, too sparse. Did you question it? Another investigator asked. Yes, Elena said, but not formally. I should have. Reed leaned forward slightly. Why didn't you? Because she'd been tired. Because escalation often meant delay. Because she'd seen too many patients lost to procedure instead of illness. Because intuition had whispered not this time. I made a judgment call, Elena said, based on the patient in front of me. The recorder hummed softly, indifferent. As the hours passed, the questions deepened. Internal meetings, subtle pressures, the unspoken rules nurses learned early, when to push, when to step back, when silence was rewarded. They asked about Nathan. Elena hesitated for the first time. He knew the system, she said carefully. He trusted it, more than he trusted me. The words cost her more than she'd expected. They scraped something raw inside her, reopening grief she'd tried to cauterize with anger. Did your relationship influence your actions? Reed asked. Yes, Elena said honestly, but not the way you think. She described the nights they'd worked side by side, the shared exhaustion, the quiet intimacy of knowing someone at their worst. She did not describe the way he'd held her after her mother died, or how she'd once believed love could soften institutions. Some truths were hers alone. When they finished, Elena felt hollowed out, like a house stripped of furniture, echoing with the absence of what had once filled it. You did the right thing, Reed said as they stood. Elena didn't respond. Rightness felt abstract now. The cost arrived faster than she'd imagined. By the next morning, her name was circulating, carefully, partially, but unmistakably. An anonymous source, a nurse involved in a federal investigation. Speculation bloomed online, fed by old footage of the helicopters, blurred photos pulled from hospital events, comments from people who didn't know her, but were certain they understood her motives. Attention seeker, disgruntled employee, hero, traitor. Each label tried to claim her, to simplify what could not be simplified. Her phone filled with messages she didn't answer. Former colleagues asking if it was true. Others warning her to be careful. One from Lillian Brooks, curt and unmistakable. You're burning bridges you don't understand. Elena deleted it without replying. The hardest message came from Nathan. I never meant to hurt you. Please let me explain. She stared at the screen for a long time before turning the phone face down. Explanation implied equivalence. There was none left to negotiate. At night, alone in another temporary room, Elena returned to her journal. The pages were heavier now, filled with testimony and aftermath, with fear she no longer tried to disguise as professionalism. I thought silence was neutral, she wrote. I know now it's an action, and it always serves someone. She slept badly, dreamed of monitors flatlining, of doors closing just before she reached them, of helicopters hovering without landing. Weeks passed in a blur of interviews, affidavits, preparation. She learned the language of investigations the way she'd learned medical shorthand, efficient, detached, necessary. She also learned how loneliness sharpened when you became inconvenient. One afternoon, Claire visited her again. No jacket this time. Just a tired woman who'd seen this arc before. They're coming after your credibility, Claire said. Harder now. I expected that, Elena replied. They'll question your competence, your motives, your relationships. Elena met her gaze. I know. Claire studied her for a moment. Do you regret it? Elena thought of the ICU, of Michael Reyes breathing, of her own reflection in that dark window weeks ago, half erased. No, she said, but it hurts. Claire nodded. It usually does. When Claire left, Elena sat by the window and watched the city pulse beneath her. Sirens, traffic, ordinary emergencies layered over invisible ones. She understood now that speaking wasn't a single act. It was a continuous choice. Every day, silence offered itself again, tempting, reasonable, protective, and every day she refused it, not because she was fearless, but because the cost of silence had finally become unbearable. The hearings ended without spectacle. There were no sweeping speeches, no cinematic confessions that dissolved corruption in a single afternoon. Just months of testimony, redacted documents, sealed settlements, and carefully worded press releases that tried to sound like accountability without quite committing to it. Coastline Medical paid fines. Several executives resigned to pursue other opportunities. A federal oversight committee was announced. Progress, people said. Enough, others insisted. Elena watched it all from a distance. By then, she no longer lived in the city where everything had broken open. She had moved north, inland, to a smaller place where the mornings were quiet and strangers did not know her face. The house she rented was modest. White siding, creaky floors, a backyard that sloped toward a line of eucalyptus trees. Nothing about it tried to impress. It was perfect. She worked part-time at a community health clinic 3 days a week. No prestige, no donor's wall. Just patients who called her Ms. Elena and brought homemade pastries as thanks. She didn't wear scrubs anymore, just soft sweaters and sensible shoes. But the rhythm of care returned slowly, cautiously, like a muscle relearning its purpose. Some nights the scars flared. She still woke from dreams where alarms went unanswered, where hands pulled her away from bedsides, where helicopters hovered overhead without ever landing. She still flinched when unknown numbers appeared on her phone. She still carried the weight of names she could not forget, but the panic no longer owned her. Michael Reyes entered witness protection with his family. She never saw him again. Once, months later, she received an unmarked envelope with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "I'm alive because you saw me. Thank you." No signature. Elena folded it carefully and placed it in her journal. She did not return to nursing in the way she once imagined. The hospital corridors, the politics disguised as protocol, they no longer called to her. Instead, she volunteered with advocacy groups pushing for whistleblower protections, for nurses whose concerns were dismissed as attitude problems, for patients whose outcomes vanished into footnotes. She spoke occasionally at closed-door panels, never on television, never chasing validation. When asked why she'd chosen to speak, she didn't frame herself as brave. "I reached a point where silence cost more than truth," she said simply. Nathan tried once more. He showed up unannounced one afternoon at the clinic, standing awkwardly near the entrance with a look she recognized immediately. Regret tangled with self-preservation. He'd lost his position, not publicly disgraced, but sidelined. The system had not protected him the way he'd believed it would. "Elena," he said, hope flickering, "I just wanted to see you." She stepped outside with him, closing the door gently behind her. The air smelled like cut grass and antiseptic soap. "I'm not the person you're looking for," she said before he could begin. "I know," he replied. "I just needed to say I'm sorry." She studied him, noticing how unfamiliar he felt now. The attraction was gone, burned away by clarity. There was no hatred left either. Just distance. "I believe you're sorry," she said, "but that doesn't mean we're meant to understand each other anymore." He nodded, swallowing hard. "You changed everything." Elena considered that. "No," she said, "I just stopped shrinking." He left without another word. That night, Elena sat on her back steps as the sun dipped behind the trees, turning the sky soft and gold. She opened her journal to a blank page and wrote without thinking. "I used to measure my worth by proximity to power, to institutions, to people who were never designed to see me clearly." She paused, listening to the cicadas. "Now I measure it by alignment, by whether my voice matches my actions, by whether I can look at myself without flinching." She closed the journal. Elena was not famous. She was not celebrated. Her name appeared occasionally in footnotes and legal citations, stripped of narrative. That was fine. Recognition had never been the point. What mattered was this. When she walked down the street now, she did not feel invisible. Not because people looked at her, but because she no longer needed them to. The world remained imperfect. Systems adapted. Power shifted but did not disappear. Elena understood that better than most, but she also understood something else, something quieter and harder earned. Clarity was a form of freedom. On her last day of summer, Elena walked home from the clinic just before dusk. No helicopters, no crowds, just the steady sound of her own footsteps and the certainty of where they were taking her. For the first time in a long while, nothing was unfinished,